Now I'd like to recognize our next witness, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of projects of critical importance in my district in New York's capital region as you consider a reauthorization of the Water Resources Development Act. My constituents reside at the confluence of the mighty and historic Hudson and Mohawk rivers that helped shape America centuries ago by powering factories and mills and supporting the Erie Canal that transported goods from coast to the rest of the nation, inspiring a westward movement. The region is part of the New York-New Jersey watershed, an economic engine home to 20 million people, 6 major rivers, and more than 200 fish species. For too long, our watershed has faced extreme pressures from sea level rise and flooding, hundreds of outdated dams, and legacy pollutants. The deaths of dozens of residents from Hurricane Ida and $100 billion of damage from Superstorm Sandy remain fresh in our minds and must compel us to take action to prevent such tragic and costly events in the future. If we do not, sea level rise is expected to impact 9,000 acres of riverfront lands this century in the Hudson Valley alone. It is also estimated that 40 dams in the region will need to be targeted for removal each year, costing some $20 million annually. I am indeed proud to have worked closely with a coalition of more than 50 community groups and state and local governments to replicate successful federal programs, such as the Delaware River Basin Conservation Program, signed into law in the 2016 WRDA, to fill a critical conservation gap in our region. The requested bill language will coordinate restoration activities to improve water quality, remove obsolete dams, improve critical flood controls, and promote healthy ecosystems. Like the Delaware River Program, our watershed program would be housed in the Fish and Wildlife Service. However, I have ensured that consultation with the Army Corps will be a central component. This language has bipartisan support, and it advanced successfully through a hearing and markup in the Natural Resources Committee earlier this year. I am continuing conversations with my colleagues across the aisle to expand this bipartisan support even further and address any remaining concerns. Given the critical role of the Army Corps in these restoration activities, I respectfully urge the committee to consider this request as well as a targeted study of the Mohawk River Basin to make recommendations for the protection of its water and cultural resources. Our watershed must be considered amongst our nation's most significant water bodies and receive the same federal support so that it can remain a vital water resource and national economic engine for generations to come. In addition, I'm grateful for the work the Army Corps is doing, not just to protect our shores and waterways, but also to make use of these treasured resources to produce clean energy, drive down costs, and combat climate change. To strengthen these efforts, I urge the committee to incorporate floating solar energy in this year's WRDA reauthorization. Floating solar offers tremendous opportunity to expand our renewable energy deployment while benefiting threatened water systems. 10% of America's electricity needs could indeed be met by deploying floating solar on our country's human-made reservoirs, many of which are owned and operated by the Army Corps. I acknowledge that not every Army Corps facility will be appropriate, but I believe it's important that the Corps begin to consider the possibility of these projects, which can take advantage of existing grid infrastructure and complement existing hydropower resources. I urge the committee to adopt language I was proud to submit with my colleague, Congressman Huffman, that would identify promising reservoirs and launch a demonstration project. This technology is already emerging as a promising industry. I'm thrilled to report that a community in my district, Cohoes, New York, received funding in the FY22 appropriations package to install floating solar panels on a municipal reservoir. This effort should serve as a model for the Army Corps and communities across our nation as we scale this technology, implement smart, clean energy systems, and drive down those consumer costs. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify and for your continued work to strengthen and protect our nation's vital water resources. With that, I yield back and thank you again for the opportunity.
We thank the gentleman. Are there any questions for the gentleman? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser.
Thank you. Our next witness